The afternoon sun bathed the quiet suburban street in golden light, casting long shadows across the Parker family's neatly trimmed lawn. It should have been an ordinary day, just another peaceful afternoon where children played freely, their laughter echoing between houses. But in the span of mere minutes, everything changed. 8-year-old Olivia Parker was in the backyard, arranging her stuffed animals for a tea party beneath the towering oak tree. She was lost in her own world, humming softly, adjusting the tiny porcelain cups with careful precision. A gentle breeze rustled her copper curls as she lifted her favorite teddy bear, positioning him as the honored guest at the head of the table. That was when she heard it. A voice, smooth and friendly, yet laced with something unplaceable. "Hey there," the man called out, leaning casually against the wooden gate. He wore a crisp button-down shirt and a warm smile. The kind that put adults at ease, but sent an instinctive ripple of unease through Olivia's small frame. "I was just walking by and couldn't help but notice your tea party. Looks like you're missing a few guests." She didn't reply. Something about the way he lingered, the way his gaze flickered toward the open kitchen window, sent a shiver down her spine. "I've got puppies in my van," he continued, voice lowering just slightly, as if sharing a secret. "Special ones. Just the kind a sweet girl like you would love to take care of." The moment stretched thin. Olivia's fingers tightened around her bear, her little body stiffening. A flicker of hesitation crossed her face, an almost imperceptible shift between childhood curiosity and primal fear. The gate had been latched. She was sure of it, but now it hung open just enough for the man to slip inside. From the kitchen, Laura Parker reached for her phone, her sister's voice buzzing in her ear about an upcoming birthday party. A mundane conversation, one she wouldn't even remember later. But then, as she turned back toward the window, her breath caught in her throat. The gate. Open. A man. "Olivia! Olivia!" The name tore from her lips like a blade. The man's head snapped up, his expression vanishing into something cold, calculating. He lunged, his hand closing around Olivia's small wrist. The teddy bear hit the ground. Across the street, Eleanor Briggs had seen enough. "Hey, get away from that child!" Her voice was sharp, cutting through the afternoon air. For a fraction of a second, the man hesitated. Olivia seized the moment, yanking her arm free, stumbling backward, sprinting toward her mother's outstretched arms. The black van roared to life, tires screeching against pavement as it sped away. The neighborhood was still, save for Olivia's shallow, gasping breaths against her mother's chest. But she never shed a tear. She never made a sound. The investigation moved quickly, but nothing could have prepared the Parker family or the tight-knit community for what came next. As police officers canvassed the neighborhood, knocking on doors and collecting statements, an unsettling realization began to take shape. The man who had tried to take Olivia hadn't been some nameless predator lurking in the shadows. He was someone they all knew, someone they trusted. His name was Edward Monroe, the esteemed principal of Westfield Elementary School. For over 15 years, Monroe had built a pristine reputation as an educator devoted to nurturing young minds. He was a regular speaker at school safety meetings, the organizer of charity drives, and the very man who had once reassured parents that their children were safe under his watch. His presence at school events had always been met with warm smiles and firm handshakes. Now, those same hands had nearly stolen a little girl in broad daylight. When Olivia's mother, Laura, was first shown his photo at the police station, her breath hitched. She recognized him immediately, not as the man from the school meetings, not as the respected community leader, but as the figure in her backyard, the one whose fingers had curled around her daughter's wrist. "It's him," she whispered, her voice raw, filled with disbelief and something darker, rage. "I know it's him." Across town, Monroe sat at his desk in the school's administration office, his demeanor unchanged. As the first news of the investigation trickled in, he remained calm, unshaken. He still held that same confident smile, that same practiced air of innocence that had shielded him for years. When detectives arrived to question him, Monroe greeted them with his usual charm, offering them coffee, as if they were just another set of parents seeking reassurance. "I heard about the attempted abduction," he said smoothly, shaking his head in apparent concern. "Terrible, truly terrible. How can I help?" But Detective Jack Whitman wasn't fooled. He had spent 25 years chasing predators who wore the faces of ordinary men. And he had seen that look before, the carefully crafted mask, the unwavering composure. "We just have a few questions," Whitman replied, watching Monroe's expression closely. "Standard procedure, of course." Monroe leaned back in his chair, nodding easily. "Of course," he echoed. But when they left, his fingers twitched against the edge of his desk. Because for the first time, someone was looking too closely. Someone wasn't buying the lie. The silence was worse than the screaming. At first, Olivia's parents thought she was in shock. It had been a terrifying ordeal, one no child should ever have to endure. She had been grabbed, ripped from the comfort of her own backyard, by a man she had trusted, a man they had trusted. The fear alone was enough to paralyze anyone. So when Olivia didn't speak that first night, when she simply curled into a ball on her bed, staring at the wall with vacant, glassy eyes, Laura and Daniel Parker told themselves it was temporary. "She just needs time," Laura whispered to her husband, brushing her daughter's copper curls away from her forehead. "She'll come back to us." But time passed, and Olivia remained locked in a world of silence. She no longer asked for bedtime stories, no longer chattered excitedly about the pictures she drew. She stopped playing in the yard, stopped laughing at her favorite cartoons. At school, she sat in the back of the classroom, motionless, her gaze fixed downward as if looking at the wrong person might invite danger. Teachers, once delighted by her endless curiosity, now watched her with pity. She wasn't just quiet, she was gone. One evening, a week after the attempted abduction, Laura found Olivia sitting on the living room floor, clutching her teddy bear so tightly her knuckles had turned white. Her lips moved, soundlessly, as if she were whispering secrets to the stuffed animal. "Sweetheart?" Laura knelt beside her, her voice soft. "What are you saying?" Olivia flinched at the sound, as if her mother's voice had startled her. Then she squeezed her eyes shut, pressing her forehead against the bear's fur. But no words came, not even a whisper. The next morning, they took her to a specialist. "Selective mutism," Dr. Patricia Reynolds explained gently, her tone measured yet firm. "It's a severe anxiety response. Olivia physically can speak, but psychologically, she can't make herself do it. It's as though her voice has been locked away." Laura clutched her husband's hand beneath the desk. "How do we unlock it?" Dr. Reynolds hesitated. "That depends. Sometimes therapy helps. Sometimes it takes something more." That night, as Daniel tucked Olivia into bed, he tried once more. "You're safe now, sweetheart," he whispered, his voice cracking. "No one will ever hurt you again." She stared at the ceiling, unblinking, silent. Daniel swallowed hard, because deep down he knew she didn't believe him. The therapy sessions weren't working. Week after week, Olivia sat in the same chair, in the same office, surrounded by soft pastel walls meant to feel safe. She played with the toys when asked, nodded when spoken to, but never spoke. Her silence had become a fortress. Nothing. No storybooks, no gentle coaxing, no carefully structured exercises could break through. Laura and Daniel were running out of hope when Dr. Reynolds made a quiet suggestion. "There's another approach we could try," she said, sliding a brochure across the desk. "It's unconventional, but it's helped children with similar trauma." Laura picked up the paper, her eyes scanning the words. "Animal-assisted trauma therapy." "A dog?" Daniel's skepticism was clear. "You think a dog can reach her when nothing else has?" Dr. Reynolds leaned forward. "Not just any dog. These animals have been trained to work with children who've experienced severe trauma. Their presence alone can create a sense of security, a connection that doesn't rely on words." And so 3 days later, Olivia met Max. The center smelled of fresh-cut hay and something earthy, comforting. Sunlight streamed through large windows, illuminating framed pictures of children, smiling, laughing, with their therapy animals. But Olivia remained frozen, her small hands clutching the hem of her sweater as they entered the waiting area. A door opened, and Dr. Daniel Whitmore stepped inside. At his side, moving with quiet grace, was a large German shepherd with a black and tan coat and a jagged scar along his flank. "This is Max," Dr. Whitmore said gently. "He used to be a police dog. He helped officers find children who were lost or in danger. But Max got hurt protecting someone, and now he's looking for a new friend." Olivia's green eyes flickered toward the dog, but quickly darted away. Max didn't move toward her. He simply watched. His deep brown eyes, filled with something patient and knowing, never left her. For what felt like forever, the room was silent. Then, Olivia took a step forward. The adults barely breathed. Max remained still, his tail twitching ever so slightly. Another step, then another. She was only a foot away now. Max lowered himself onto his belly, resting his massive head on his paws. A silent invitation. Olivia hesitated, then reached out. Her trembling fingers brushed against his fur. For the first time in weeks, her shoulders relaxed. For the first time since that terrible day, she wasn't afraid. The courtroom was silent. 8-year-old Olivia Parker sat on the witness stand, small and fragile beneath the harsh overhead lights. Her hands were folded neatly in her lap, but her fingers twitched, nervous, uncertain. The weight of the entire case rested on her tiny shoulders. Across the room, Edward Monroe sat at the defense table, his expression as composed as ever. Dressed in a sharp gray suit, he radiated the quiet confidence of a man who had spent years manipulating those around him. If he felt any fear, he didn't show it. But Max did. Lying obediently at Olivia's feet, the scarred German shepherd watched Monroe with an intensity that sent an unspoken warning through the air. He remembered. "Olivia," Assistant District Attorney Jenna Collins said gently, standing just a few feet away, careful not to startle her. "Can you tell us what happened that day in your backyard?" A beat of silence stretched across the courtroom. Olivia's lips parted, but no sound came out. The pressure in the room grew heavier. She hadn't spoken in public since the attack. Max lifted his head, sensing her distress. Without looking down, Olivia's small fingers made a subtle movement, a signal only Max would understand. The German shepherd's response was immediate. His body tensed, his ears pricked forward, and then a low, deep growl rumbled from his chest. It was barely audible, but it cut through the stillness like a blade. Monroe shifted slightly, just a flicker of movement, but it was enough. Max had locked onto him. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. The judge's gavel struck sharply against wood. "Order," he commanded, but the damage was done. Detective Jack Whitman, seated near the back, leaned forward, eyes narrowing. He had seen it too. This wasn't coincidence. This was recognition. Olivia inhaled shakily, gripping the armrest of the chair. She wasn't looking at Monroe, but Max was. The dog's reaction spoke volumes, a truth more powerful than words. Collins turned back to Olivia, her voice steady but knowing. "Sweetheart," she said softly, "do you see the man who was in your backyard that day?" Another long pause. Olivia's breath quickened. Then, slowly, deliberately, she lifted one small hand and pointed. Directly at Edward Monroe. The tension shattered. Gasps filled the room. The mask slipped from Monroe's face for the first time. And in that moment, everyone in the courtroom knew he was guilty. The wind howled through the dense pines, rustling the brittle leaves that blanketed the ground. Detective Jack Whitman stood at the edge of the clearing, his flashlight cutting through the darkness, illuminating the decaying wooden structure before him. The cabin sat eerily still, its walls warped by time, its roof sagging under years of neglect. But there were signs, subtle, deliberate, that someone had been here recently. Fresh tire tracks in the mud, a faint, acrid scent in the air, the unmistakable feeling that something was terribly wrong. "Secure the perimeter," Whitman ordered, his voice low but firm. "We go in on my count." The officers moved like shadows, their weapons drawn, their boots crunching against the damp earth. The air inside the cabin was stale, thick with the scent of rot and something else, something metallic, something human. Whitman's gut tightened. The front room was almost bare. A wooden table, 2 rusted chairs, a stone fireplace filled with nothing but cold ash. It looked abandoned. But Whitman had spent too many years hunting men like Edward Monroe to believe that. He moved cautiously, his fingers trailing over the dusty surfaces, searching for something, anything, that felt out of place. Then, from the back of the cabin, Officer Ramirez's voice cut through the silence. "Detective, you need to see this." Whitman followed the beam of Ramirez's flashlight to a narrow wooden door near the rear of the cabin. It was newer than the rest of the structure, the wood unstained by time. But what made Whitman's breath catch wasn't the door itself. It was the heavy-duty padlock securing it shut. "Bolt cutters," he barked, stepping back as another officer rushed forward. The lock snapped with an ominous clink. Whitman braced himself, then pushed the door open. A staircase spiraled down into absolute darkness. His flashlight pierced the void. What lay below was worse than anything he had imagined. The basement was small, damp, its walls lined with thick insulation, soundproofing. A single cot sat in the corner, its thin mattress covered in a crumpled, filthy blanket. Chains bolted to the wall glinted under the harsh light. And then movement. The blanket shifted. A pair of wide, terrified eyes peered out from beneath the fabric. A child. Alive. Whitman's heart slammed against his ribs. He holstered his weapon, stepping forward carefully. "You're safe now," he said, voice steady but gentle. "My name is Jack. We're here to take you home." The little girl's lips trembled. "Are you real?" she whispered, her voice cracked from disuse. Whitman swallowed hard. "Yes, sweetheart," he said. "I'm real." Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't cry. She was too scared to believe it. And in that moment, Whitman knew this wasn't just an abduction case. This was something far, far worse. Detective Jack Whitman sat at his desk, the weight of exhaustion pressing down on him like an iron vice. The evidence from the Hawk cabin in the woods was spread across the surface before him. Photographs, notes, forensic reports, each piece more damning than the last. But it wasn't just about what they had found. It was about what they had uncovered. The girl they had rescued, Emma Sullivan, was only 9 years old. She had been missing for 6 months, and in her fragile, whisper-thin voice, she had told them something that sent ice straight through Whitman's veins. "There was another girl before me," she had said, clutching the teddy bear a social worker had given her. But he said she wasn't special enough. Her words still echoed in his mind. Not special enough. Now, as Whitman studied the photographs recovered from the basement, the horrifying pattern became clear. It wasn't random. It had never been random. Each image was meticulously labeled: dates, locations, children, some with red X's slashed across their faces, others, like Olivia Parker and Emma Sullivan, untouched. Marked for something else. A sharp knock on his door pulled him from his thoughts. ADA Jenna Collins stepped in, her face pale, her jaw tight. In her hands, she held a thin manila folder. "We got the DNA results back," she said. "It's him." Whitman exhaled slowly. The blood sample found at the cabin matched Edward Monroe. And not just that, it also matched an unsolved case from 3 years ago. He reached for the file, flipping through the report. It detailed an attack on a K-9 unit during a failed child abduction. The suspect had escaped, but the police dog, Max, had been stabbed protecting the child. That wound, that scar running down the German Shepherd's side, had been inflicted by Monroe himself. He had been doing this for years, and no one had stopped him. Collins cleared her throat, pulling Whitman's focus back. "He's going to try and cut a deal," she said. "His lawyer is already making noise about pleading guilty to the attempted abduction of Olivia. He'll deny everything else." Whitman's grip tightened on the file. "Not a chance." "Get me a warrant," he said, voice like steel. "I want his DNA compared against every cold case we have." Because this wasn't just about Olivia. It was about every child who had vanished before her. The courtroom was packed, the air thick with anticipation. The trial of Edward Monroe had gripped the community, splitting it down the middle. Those who believed in his carefully crafted facade, and those who had begun to see the monster lurking beneath it. But today, there would be no more lies. Monroe sat at the defense table, his once polished image unraveling under the weight of evidence. His jaw was clenched, his fingers twitching against the cold wood. For the first time, he didn't look untouchable. At the prosecution's table, Assistant District Attorney Jenna Collins stacked her notes with deliberate precision. She didn't need theatrics today. The truth was damning enough. "Your Honor," she began, her voice steady, firm. "The state is prepared to present new forensic evidence directly linking the defendant to multiple abductions." A murmur rippled through the gallery. Monroe's attorney, Michael Graves, shifted uneasily before standing. "Objection, Your Honor. The defense was not made aware of." "Overruled," Judge Rebecca Martinez interjected, her sharp gaze cutting through the room. "Proceed, Miss Collins." Collins turned to the jury. For years, Edward Monroe operated in plain sight, hiding behind his reputation as an educator, as a protector of children. But he was neither. He was a predator. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. And thanks to DNA evidence obtained from his past victims, including a police K-9 he attacked in the line of duty, we now have irrefutable proof. Graves shifted in his seat. Monroe's expression remained carefully blank, but the tension in his shoulders betrayed him. Collins lifted a single photograph, a school portrait of Olivia Parker. "This child survived," she said. Then she lifted another, a younger girl with dark curls and hollow eyes, Emma Sullivan. "This one was rescued." She set the next photograph down carefully. The girl in this image was younger still. This one had not been as lucky. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Monroe finally spoke, his voice hoarse. "I want to make a deal." Judge Martinez leaned forward. "The only deal you're getting," she said coldly, "is life in prison." A sob broke from somewhere in the gallery. A mother, a father, someone who had lost a child to this man. And just like that, justice was served. In the end, justice prevailed, but the scars remained. For Olivia Parker, the journey back to normalcy was not about erasing the past, but learning to live beyond it. The nightmares still came, shadows still lingered in the corners of her mind, but she was no longer alone. She had Max. The bond between a child and a dog is something profound, something that goes beyond words. Max didn't need Olivia to speak. He understood her pain in a way no human could. He stood by her, unwavering. His quiet strength, a reminder that healing isn't about forgetting. It's about finding the courage to move forward. Through Olivia's story, we are reminded of a simple but powerful truth. Animals are more than just companions. They are protectors, healers, and silent warriors who walk beside us. Max wasn't just a pet, he was a lifeline, a guardian who gave Olivia back her voice when the world had stolen it away. But how many animals like Max are abandoned, neglected, or cast aside when they are no longer useful? How many creatures with unwavering loyalty are left behind when they have so much love left to give? Let this be a call to action, to cherish the animals who love us unconditionally, to respect them, to protect them, and to give them the care they so selflessly offer us. Because sometimes, the ones who save us aren't people at all, but the faithful, four-legged souls who stand beside us in our darkest hours. So love them, honor them, and when the time comes, be their hero, just as they are ours.